My name is Emily Carter, and for 8 years I believed I was married to a decent man. My husband's name is Daniel Carter. We met in our 20s, built a life that looked stable from the outside, and convinced everyone, including ourselves, that we were solid. We weren't perfect, but I thought we were honest. I worked part-time, managed the house, supported his career, and trusted him completely. Daniel was the kind of man who liked routine, who said he valued loyalty and family, and who often reminded me how lucky we were compared to others. I believed him because I had no reason not to. That belief ended the morning I learned another woman existed in his life, and that her name was Lauren. I didn't learn about Lauren through a dramatic confession or a confrontation. I learned about her quietly, accidentally, on a normal Tuesday morning while standing in my kitchen. I was rinsing rice when Daniel's phone lit up on the counter. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious. The screen just faced me, and the message stayed there long enough for my eyes to read it. "I can't wait for our vacation. I'm counting the days." The contact name said Lauren Office. I remember staring at the screen, confused at first, then slowly aware that nothing about that message belonged to work. When Daniel walked in moments later, smiling and relaxed, I already knew something in my life had shifted permanently, even if he didn't realize it yet. That night, after he fell asleep, I unlocked his phone using the same passcode he had always used, our anniversary date. The irony of that detail still hurts when I think about it. What I found wasn't a misunderstanding or a brief mistake. It was a full relationship. Messages stretching back almost 2 years, full of affection, plans, photos, and promises. I saw booking confirmations for flights and hotels, conversations about restaurants, and messages where he described me as someone who would never suspect anything. One line in particular burned into my memory. "My wife thinks I have a work conference." In that moment, I understood that he hadn't just betrayed me. He had built an entire parallel life while standing beside me every day. I didn't cry immediately. I think my body went numb because it had to. Instead of confronting him, I gathered myself. I took screenshots of everything and saved them in multiple places. Heck, our finances, and saw that he had been using our shared money to pay for trips and dinners with Lauren. I contacted my cousin Samira, a lawyer, and asked her for advice without drama or emotion. She told me something I will never forget. The person who reacts first often loses control of the story. That's when I decided I would not confront Daniel in anger. I would let him walk confidently into the consequences of his own choices. Over the next few days, I acted exactly the same as I always had. I cooked his meals, listened to him talk about work, and nodded when he casually mentioned an upcoming conference in Dubai. When he asked me to help him with travel preparations, I agreed calmly. He thought my silence meant ignorance. He didn't realize it meant preparation. I waited until the night before his trip, when he went to bed early, already half living in the fantasy he was about to escape into. That night, I took out his suitcase and packed it myself. I folded his clothes neatly, placed his toiletries inside, and then added something he hadn't planned for: a folder containing printed screenshots of his conversations with Lauren, the hotel and flight bookings, and proof of the money he had spent. On the first page, I wrote a single sentence: "Enjoy your vacation. Don't come back." I zipped the suitcase shut and placed it by the front door. Then I went to bed beside him and waited for morning. When Daniel woke up and saw the suitcase, he was confused at first. He laughed and asked why I had packed his bag. I told him calmly that since he was going on a vacation, I thought I'd help. When he insisted it was just a work trip, I asked him to open the suitcase. Watching his face change as he saw the evidence was one of the quietest, yet most powerful moments of my life. He didn't apologize. Instead, he accused me of invading his privacy. That reaction told me everything I needed to know about who he really was. When his phone rang and I saw Lauren's name on the screen, I answered it myself. I introduced myself as his wife and told her calmly that I knew everything. There was silence, then shock, then anger. I handed the phone back to Daniel and walked away while his carefully constructed lies collapsed in real time. By the time he finished the call, Lauren was no longer excited about her vacation. She hadn't signed up to be the exposed secret in someone else's marriage. Daniel begged after that. He apologized, blamed stress, claimed confusion, and asked me to think about our history. But history means nothing when respect is gone. I told him to leave. Not in anger, not screaming, but with finality. He stood at the door holding the suitcase I packed, finally realizing that I wasn't negotiating anymore. I closed the door behind him, locked it, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Default text. In the weeks that followed, there were calls from family, pressured to forgive for the sake of appearances, and attempts to guilt me into silence. I refused. I chose honesty over comfort and dignity over denial. Daniel lost Lauren shortly after. Lies don't survive exposure, and men like him don't know how to live without someone covering for them. He tried to come back later, not because he loved me, but because he missed the stability I provided. By then, I was already gone emotionally. I thought the hardest part would be asking my husband to leave. I was wrong. The hardest part came after. When Daniel realized that I hadn't packed his bags to scare him or teach him a lesson, I had packed them to end something permanently. For a few weeks after he left, there was an eerie quiet in my life. Not the painful kind people warn you about, but a clean silence, the kind that lets you hear your own thoughts again. I slept better. I ate when I was hungry, not when it was convenient for someone else. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for a man to come home and explain why he was late. Daniel, on the other hand, unraveled quickly. At first, his messages were formal and controlled, as if he believed this was just a phase we would talk through. He wrote things like, "We should sit down like adults, and let's not make any rash decisions." I didn't respond. A week later, the tone shifted. The messages grew longer, more emotional, filled with apologies that arrived too late and explanations no one had asked for. He said he was confused, that he felt lost, that he never meant to hurt me. He said Lauren was a mistake, a distraction, something that got out of hand. What he never said, not once, was that he chose to betray me every single day for nearly 2 years. When he realized silence wasn't working, he showed up at the house. I saw him through the window, standing on the porch like a stranger, holding flowers he must have bought on the way over. I didn't open the door. I didn't need to. I spoke through it, calmly telling him this wasn't his home anymore, and that showing up uninvited was crossing a boundary. He sounded shocked, as if the idea of boundaries only applied to me before. He asked if we could just talk. I told him we already had, just not in the way he expected. What Daniel didn't know was that while he was scrambling to fix his life, I was quietly rebuilding mine. I finalized legal steps, separated finances completely, and made it clear on paper that reconciliation was not an option. I wasn't trying to punish him. I was protecting myself. The clarity I felt wasn't anger-driven. It was the calm that comes when you finally accept the truth instead of negotiating with it. Then Lauren disappeared from his life. Not dramatically, not with closure, but abruptly. She blocked him, cut contact, walked away the moment the fantasy collapsed and consequences appeared. Daniel tried to frame this as proof that I was the real one, that I was the person he truly loved. But love doesn't need comparison to survive. And I refused to be the consolation prize after his dream fell apart. A month after he left, Daniel called me crying. Not soft crying, but desperate, broken sobs. He told me he couldn't sleep, that he felt empty, that everything had fallen apart. Said, losing me made him realize what he had thrown away. I listened quietly, not because I was considering going back, but because I needed to hear something important for myself, and what I heard was this. He didn't miss me. He missed the stability, the forgiveness, the version of life where someone cleaned up after his mistakes. When he asked if we could try again, I said no without hesitation. Not because I hated him, but because I finally loved myself enough to stop explaining why I deserved honesty. I told him I wasn't angry anymore, and that was the truth. Anger burns out. Self-respect doesn't. I told him I hoped he figured out who he was without someone covering for him. Then I ended the call. The last time I saw Daniel was months later, by accident in a grocery store. He looked smaller somehow, less certain, like a man who had lost his anchor and didn't know how to stand upright alone. He tried to smile. I nodded politely. The way you do at someone you once knew well but no longer recognize. There is no confrontation, no final speech. There didn't need to be. Closure isn't something another person gives you, it's something you take. People sometimes ask me if I regret not giving him another chance. I don't. Because giving someone another chance only works if they understand what they did wrong without needing to lose everything first. Daniel understood only after the consequences arrived, and by then it was too late. Trust isn't something you rebuild from the rubble of repeated lies. It's something you protect by walking away. I learned that strength doesn't always look like fighting. Sometimes it looks like packing a suitcase, opening a door, and refusing to beg someone to value you. Daniel planned a vacation with his girlfriend, believing I would stay quiet, confused, and forgiving. I packed his bags first, and when he came back begging, I didn't need revenge, raised voices, or public humiliation. I only needed one word, no, because the real ending wasn't him leaving. The real ending was me staying with myself. Default text beat, the time Daniel realized begging wouldn't bring me back, he changed strategies. That's when the rumors started. At first, they were subtle questions disguised as concern. Messages from mutual friends asking if I was okay, or if everything had really happened the way I said it did. Then the story shifted. I was suddenly cold, controlling, emotionally distant. According to Daniel, he hadn't cheated. He had escaped. I hadn't packed his bags because he betrayed me. I had done it because I was impossible to live with. It was impressive, really, how quickly a man who had lied so comfortably to 2 women learned to lie to an entire community. I heard about the things he was saying long before I responded. I chose not to interrupt the process. Smear campaigns rely on urgency and reaction. They need you to panic, to defend yourself publicly, to appear emotional and unstable. I did the opposite. I stayed quiet. I continued living my life. I let the version of me that Daniel created spread without resistance. Because lies need maintenance, and I knew he would eventually contradict himself trying to keep them alive. The breaking point came when his mother called me, her voice tight with accusation. He said Daniel had told her I had been spying on him for years, that I had humiliated him, that I had destroyed the marriage without giving him a chance to explain. She asked me if any of it was true. I told her yes. Every story has a version that sounds reasonable when you remove the evidence. Then I asked her one question. Would you like to see proof? There was a long pause on the line before she said yes. That was the first time I shared the screenshots. Not online, not publicly, just privately, calmly, and completely. I didn't editorialize. I didn't narrate. I sent dates, messages, booking confirmations, and bank statements. I sent the line where he said I would never suspect anything. I sent it all, then said nothing more. When she finally replied, it wasn't with anger. It was with silence. And silence, I learned, can be louder than denial. Daniel escalated after that. He began telling people I was trying to ruin him, that I was obsessed with punishment, that I was dragging his name through the mud. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been exhausting. I hadn't posted a single thing. I hadn't contacted his workplace. I hadn't told strangers. All I had done was refuse to lie for him, and that apparently was unforgivable. Then he crossed a line. One afternoon, I received a message from a former coworker of his. asking why Daniel had told them I was mentally unstable and not safe to be around. I stared at that message for a long time before replying. That wasn't just a lie, it was an attempt to discredit me in case I ever spoke up. It was the kind of accusation meant to scare a woman into silence. That was the moment I stopped waiting. I didn't confront Daniel directly. I contacted my lawyer and showed her everything: the affair, the financial misuse, the messages, and now the false statements. She didn't hesitate. We drafted a formal notice outlining defamation, harassment, and intent to misrepresent. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise. It explained clearly and unemotionally that any further attempts to damage my reputation would be met with documented legal response. The letter included dates, quotes, and evidence. Facts don't shout. They don't threaten. They simply exist. When Daniel received it, his tone changed overnight. The confident storytelling stopped. The messages became careful, then non-existent. People who had quietly believed his version began reaching out to me, not to apologize loudly, but to ask gentle questions. I answered them honestly, without emotion, without commentary. I shared proof only when asked. I never asked anyone to take sides. I didn't have to. Lies collapse under their own weight when the truth refuses to move. The final consequence arrived where Daniel least expected it, at work. Not because I contacted his employer, but because someone else did. One of the people he had confided in, someone he trusted, grew uncomfortable carrying his version of events once the evidence surfaced. The rumors reached HR, and HR asked questions. When Daniel was required to explain discrepancies between his statements and documented timelines, the story he had rehearsed so carefully unraveled. Affairs are personal. Patterns of dishonesty are professional. When he called me after that, his voice wasn't angry or desperate. It was small. He asked why I couldn't just let things go. I told him the truth. I did let go. I said, "You're the one who keeps pulling at something that's already over." He accused me of ruining his life. I didn't argue. I didn't correct him. I simply said, "You did that the moment you decided lying was easier than being honest." The last message I ever received from him came weeks later. It said, "I hope you're happy." I didn't reply. Because happiness isn't something you explain to someone who only recognizes it when it's serving them. Happiness, for me, looked like quiet mornings, restored boundaries, and the absence of constant doubt. It looked like trusting my own judgment again. People sometimes believe that revenge means destruction. It doesn't. Real consequences are quieter than that. They look like access being removed, doors closing without explanation, an audience slowly realizing the performance was fake. Daniel tried to rewrite our ending by turning me into the villain. All he succeeded in doing was showing everyone exactly who he was when he thought no one was watching. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to defend my sanity. I didn't need to expose him publicly. I let his words stand next to the truth and watched which one survived. That was the last trap he walked into on his set himself. He planned a vacation with his girlfriend, believing I would stay silent. I packed his bags first. When he begged, I said no. When he lied, I showed proof. And when he tried to destroy my reputation, I didn't fight back loudly. I stepped aside and let the truth finish the job. Because the strongest ending isn't revenge, it's freedom.